When a well-dressed man walked into a prestigious bank to cash a check, he expected professionalism, but instead he faced humiliation. What the bank manager didn't realize? That man wasn't just any customer. He owned the bank. What happened next left the entire room in stunned silence. The bell above the door chimed softly as Darius stepped into the lavish interior of Crownstone Bank in downtown Nashville. The air smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, with the quiet murmurs of business transactions echoing off the high marble ceilings. Darius, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, carried himself with quiet confidence as he approached the teller line. He held a check in his hand, a large one, and his expression was calm, almost unreadable. The line moved slowly, but Darius didn't seem to mind. He looked around the room with measured patience, observing the chandeliers casting warm light over customers seated in plush chairs. The bank was the kind of place where prestige was practically dripping off the walls, a place that seemed to assume its patrons had earned the right to be there. When it was finally his turn, Darius stepped forward and handed the check to the young teller behind the counter. She glanced at it, her eyebrows lifting slightly at the amount, before her face shifted into something more neutral. "I'll need to call my manager to approve this, sir," she said, her tone polite but hesitant. Darius nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Of course. Take your time." A man appeared moments later, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wearing an expensive suit that seemed designed to command authority. Mr. Simmons, the bank manager, approached the counter briskly, his eyes immediately darting to the check. He took it from the teller, his gaze flickering to Darius with the briefest hesitation. There was a pause, a subtle narrowing of Simmons's eyes. "Excuse me, sir," Simmons began, his voice low but firm. "Do you have any ID to go with this check?" Darius calmly reached into his pocket, pulling out his driver's license and sliding it across the counter. Simmons barely glanced at it before handing it back, his expression tight. "I see. Well, I'll need to verify this with the issuing party," Simmons said, holding the check as though it were a suspicious artifact. Something in the air shifted, not noticeable to most, but Darius caught it. A look of skepticism crossed Simmons's face, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't the kind of doubt born from procedure. It was personal. "Is there an issue?" Darius asked, his tone measured but firm. Simmons didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the check, the corners of his mouth tugging downward. "Just give me a moment," he muttered before walking away toward his office. The tension in the room thickened as Darius waited, his posture straight, his expression composed. This was only the beginning. Minutes passed, and Darius remained at the counter, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the buzzing activity around him. A faint murmur of whispers started from a few customers nearby, their curious glances darting toward him. Mr. Simmons reappeared, holding the check in one hand, his expression stern and unreadable. "I've looked into this, Mr. Darius, is it?" Simmons began, deliberately leaving off Darius's last name, as though it didn't matter. "This check raises some red flags. Can you tell me where you got it?" Darius tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes studying Simmons. "It was issued to me as payment for a business transaction. Everything is in order, I assure you." Simmons's lips pressed into a thin line. "A business transaction, you say?" He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering but losing none of its edge. "And what business are you in?" For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them. Darius's gaze didn't waver. "I'm in real estate development," he replied evenly. Simmons let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Real estate, huh? Must be quite a deal to warrant a check like this." He waved the paper slightly, drawing attention to it. His tone sharpened. "Look, these things don't just fall out of the sky. I'm going to have to decline this transaction." The words hung in the air like a slap. "You haven't verified anything yet?" Darius said, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "The issuing party's contact information is right there. Call them." Simmons waved him off dismissively. "I don't need to waste my time chasing down details for something that's obviously suspicious. If you want, you can try cashing this somewhere else." The volume of his voice rose slightly, enough to catch the attention of more customers and staff. A woman seated near the entrance glanced up, her eyes flitting between Simmons and Darius. One of the tellers whispered something to her co-worker, their gazes darting nervously toward the manager. Darius took a step closer to the counter, his calm now threaded with a quiet intensity. "So, you're refusing to validate this check because—" "Why, exactly?" Simmons shrugged, his tone condescending. "Look, these procedures are in place for a reason. It's not personal." But the way his eyes lingered on Darius told a different story. Darius held his ground. "If it's not personal, then why not follow standard protocol and verify it? Or are you suggesting I don't belong here?" The question seemed to throw Simmons off for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Sir, this bank reserves the right to refuse service if something seems off, and frankly this doesn't look right to me." The murmurs in the room grew louder, the tension palpable. Darius glanced around briefly, catching the uncomfortable looks on the faces of the other patrons. Yet none of them spoke up. "Interesting," Darius said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. He straightened his jacket, his movements deliberate. "So, you're declining to provide service based on your feelings rather than facts?" Simmons's smirk faded, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Sir, I don't have to explain myself further. You can take this matter up with another branch if you like." Darius stood there for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he slowly reached for the check still in Simmons's hand. "If that's your final decision, I'll handle this another way," he said evenly, his tone carrying a weight that made Simmons falter slightly. As Darius turned away, pulling out his phone, Simmons muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Some people really don't know when to quit." The quiet resolve in Darius's face betrayed nothing, but the look in his eyes promised that this wasn't over. Darius stepped aside to a quieter corner of the bank, his phone held loosely in his hand. He took a deep breath, calming himself, though his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He began dialing a number, his voice low and measured as he spoke. Those close enough to overhear caught fragments of the conversation. "Yes, at the branch now, refusing to process. I understand." Meanwhile, Simmons watched him from the counter, a faint, smug grin on his face. He leaned casually against the polished wood, addressing the curious stares of nearby customers. "We have to be vigilant with fraud these days," he said, his voice carrying a tone of self-importance. "It's unfortunate, but not everyone comes in here with honest intentions." A woman standing in line shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flickering toward Darius. A man seated near the entrance frowned but remained silent. Simmons seemed to feed off the unease in the room, straightening his posture as though bolstered by the quiet approval of those around him. Darius ended his call and returned to the counter, his composure intact. "I've taken the necessary steps to address this," he said calmly. "I'd advise you to wait before making further assumptions." But Simmons wasn't interested in listening. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, you're free to address it however you like, but this check isn't going anywhere. I have a duty to protect this institution from potential scams." Darius's eyes narrowed slightly. "Potential scams? Based on what? My appearance? My profession?" His voice was quiet but carried a sharp edge that sliced through the air. Simmons's smug demeanor faltered for just a second, but he quickly recovered. "I don't know what you're implying, sir," he said loudly, clearly performing for the growing audience of customers. "But I'm simply following standard procedures." Darius gave a small, humorless laugh. "Your standard procedures don't seem to involve verifying facts. Instead, they involve making baseless assumptions in front of an audience." A hushed silence fell over the room as customers and staff alike strained to catch every word. Simmons, now visibly irritated, straightened his jacket and gestured dismissively. "Look, I've made my decision. If you'd like to escalate the matter, you're welcome to, but you're wasting your time here. For the first time, Darius's calm exterior cracked ever so slightly. He leaned in closer, his voice low but firm. "Oh, I'll escalate it, Mr. Simmons. And trust me, you're going to regret this." Simmons scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Is that a threat?" he asked, though his voice lacked the confidence he'd displayed earlier. Darius didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, pulling out his phone again and making another call. His movements were deliberate, his composure unshaken, despite the humiliation Simmons had attempted to inflict. "Some people think they can just walk in here and demand anything they want," Simmons muttered under his breath, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. A few chuckled nervously, while others shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to react. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken judgments. Darius, however, remained a pillar of quiet resolve, his calm contrasting starkly with the chaos around him. Then the sound of heavy footsteps broke the uneasy silence. A group of sharply dressed individuals entered the bank, their presence commanding immediate attention. The leader, a tall woman with a sharp blazer and an air of authority, scanned the room before her eyes landed on Darius. "Mr. Charles," she said warmly, her tone respectful and professional. "I came as soon as I got your call." The room fell into stunned silence. Simmons's face paled, his confident posture crumbling as he realized who Darius had just summoned. And just like that, the balance of power shifted, leaving everyone breathless with anticipation for what would happen next. The woman strode confidently across the marble floor, her heels clicking with authority. Behind her followed two other executives, their tailored suits and stern expressions making it clear they weren't there for a casual visit. The room seemed to hold its breath as the group approached Darius, who extended a hand in greeting. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Darius said, his voice calm yet firm. "Of course," the woman replied, shaking his hand. She turned towards Simmons, her expression instantly hardening. "I assume you're Mr. Simmons, the manager of this branch." Simmons stumbled over his words. Yes, that's me. May I ask what this is about?" His attempt at maintaining authority fell flat under the weight of the woman's piercing gaze. "This," she said, holding up the check Darius had handed over earlier, "is a matter of grave concern. Mr. Charles here is one of our most valued partners. When he informed us of the treatment he received at your hands, I was appalled." Simmons's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Valued partner?" he echoed weakly, his face losing color. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Not just a partner. Mr. Charles is the majority shareholder in this institution." Gasps rippled through the bank lobby. A man seated near the window dropped the magazine he was holding, his eyes darting between Darius and Simmons. The teller who had initially assisted Darius covered her mouth with her hand, clearly stunned. Darius stood silently, watching as the weight of the revelation crushed Simmons's fragile composure. He didn't gloat or raise his voice. Instead, he let the silence speak louder than any words could. "Wait, there must be some mistake," Simmons stammered, his voice shaking. "I didn't know. He didn't—" "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out," Darius interjected, his tone sharp but controlled. "You made a snap judgment about me the moment I walked in here, and instead of verifying the facts, you chose to humiliate me publicly." The woman turned to Simmons, her expression icy. "Your behavior today was not just unprofessional, it was unacceptable. This institution prides itself on integrity and respect for all clients, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or what assumptions you might make about them." I can explain," Simmons stuttered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Darius raised a hand, silencing him. "There's no need to explain. Your actions spoke louder than any words ever could. You judged me before you knew anything about me, and you made it clear to everyone here what you truly believe." The room was dead silent. Every eye was on Simmons, who now looked as though he wished the ground would swallow him whole. And then Darius turned to the gathered customers and staff, his next words carrying the weight of both disappointment and hope. Darius stepped forward, his calm demeanor now carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. The customers and staff watched, riveted, as he addressed the room. "I want to be very clear," Darius began, his voice measured yet firm. "This isn't just about me. This is about the way people are treated when assumptions replace facts, when bias overrides professionalism." He gestured to the check still clutched in Simmons's trembling hand. "I walked in here today expecting to be treated like any other client, fairly, respectfully, and with the courtesy that any paying customer deserves. Instead, I was judged on sight, dismissed, and publicly humiliated." The room buzzed with murmurs as Darius's words sank in. A young woman seated near the entrance nodded slightly, her expression one of quiet agreement. The tension in the air was palpable, a mix of shock, guilt, and curiosity. The executive woman who had arrived with the team stepped forward, her sharp heels clicking against the marble. "Mr. Charles, we deeply regret what happened here today. I assure you that this does not reflect the values of our institution, and we will be taking immediate action to address this incident." Her gaze shifted to Simmons, who looked like he might faint. "Mr. Simmons, your behavior today was not only unprofessional, but a clear violation of our code of conduct. You failed to perform even the most basic due diligence before jumping to conclusions. This kind of treatment will not be tolerated." Simmons opened his mouth to protest, but the woman cut him off. "Save it. Your actions today have already been documented, and we'll be addressing them internally. For now, I suggest you step aside while we resolve this matter with Mr. Charles." The audience in the lobby watched in stunned silence as Simmons, pale and visibly shaken, stepped back from the counter. He glanced at Darius, his expression a mix of anger and humiliation, but he said nothing. The woman turned back to Darius, her tone softening. "Again, Mr. Charles, we apologize. If there's anything we can do to rectify this situation immediately, please let us know." Darius looked around the room, his gaze resting briefly on each face. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the gravity of the moment. "This isn't about rectifying anything for me," he said. "This is about making sure no one else has to go through this. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, has no place in a professional setting, or anywhere else for that matter." His words seemed to resonate with the room. Some customers nodded, others looked down, avoiding his gaze. The staff behind the counter shifted uncomfortably, clearly affected by the confrontation. The executive woman nodded. "You have our word that we will be taking immediate steps to address these issues, both in this branch and throughout the company. Training, oversight, and accountability will be implemented without delay." Darius offered a small, thoughtful smile. "That's a start," he said. "But remember, change doesn't come from policies alone. It comes from people choosing to do better every single day." The weight of his words hung in the air, leaving everyone in the room with something to think about. But the moment wasn't over yet. The silence in the lobby lingered, heavy with reflection. Darius turned to Simmons one last time, his gaze steady but without malice. Instead, his voice carried the weight of a lesson, meant not just for Simmons, but for everyone watching. "You see, Mr. Simmons, respect isn't something you give based on assumptions or appearances. It's something you owe to every single person who walks through these doors, whether they're cashing a check for $10 or 10 million. Your job isn't to judge, it's to serve." Simmons's face flushed, his usual air of superiority reduced to a shadow of what it had been. He tried to hold Darius's gaze but faltered, looking down at the check still clutched in his trembling hands. Darius continued, his voice unwavering. "I didn't call your regional director here to embarrass you. I could have, but that's not who I am. I called her here to make a point, not just to you, but to everyone in this room. Assumptions like the ones you made today are the foundation of prejudice. They ripple out and create barriers that shouldn't exist. The executive woman nodded, her stern gaze fixed on Simmons. And let me add this, Mr. Simmons. You didn't just fail to do your job today. You put our institution's reputation on the line. This is not a one-off mistake. It's a sign of deeper issues that we will be addressing thoroughly. The customers murmured among themselves, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Darius let the silence hang for a moment before taking a step back. Respect isn't a favor, he said, his voice clear and resonant. It's a basic expectation. If you can't meet that, you don't belong in a role of leadership, or in any role where you interact with people. Simmons looked like he wanted to disappear, but Darius's expression wasn't one of anger, it was one of resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about making a lasting change. Darius turned to the executives. I trust you'll handle the situation appropriately. My concerns have been made clear. Absolutely, Mr. Charles, the executive woman replied firmly. This matter is now in our hands. Darius nodded, his composure unbroken. He glanced around the lobby, meeting the eyes of a few customers who now looked at him with newfound respect, or shame for their earlier judgment. And then, in a final poignant gesture, Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to the young teller who had initially served him, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted it. If you ever feel like you're being treated unfairly, no matter where you are, call me, he said softly. We all deserve better than what we've seen today. The teller nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Darius adjusted his jacket, casting one last look at Simmons before turning to leave. His footsteps echoed across the marble floor, a sound that carried the weight of justice, dignity, and the promise of change. As the doors closed behind him, the room remained still, everyone left to grapple with what they had witnessed. But one thing was certain, their assumptions would never be the same again. The silence in the bank lingered long after Darius had left, an unspoken tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Simmons stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale and clammy. He fumbled to set the check down, his hands trembling slightly as he realized the magnitude of what had just unfolded. The executive woman turned back to the customers and staff, her voice firm but composed. Let this be a lesson for everyone here today. Our institution was built on trust, equality, and fairness. If we fail to uphold those principles, we fail the very people we are here to serve. This isn't just about a single incident, it's about holding ourselves accountable and striving to do better. Several customers nodded, some looking visibly moved. The teller who had interacted with Darius wiped at her eyes discreetly, clearly affected by his parting words. As the executives exited the branch, murmurs began to fill the room. One customer, an older gentleman in a tweed jacket, leaned over to the woman next to him. He didn't just teach Simmons a lesson, he said softly. He taught all of us something today. Outside the bank, Darius stood on the busy Nashville sidewalk, the city's hum of life moving around him. He glanced up at the building for a brief moment, a faint smile playing on his lips. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a text from the executive woman. All actions have been set in motion. Thank you for your patience and for giving us the opportunity to right this wrong. Darius typed a quick reply. Thank you for listening. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step matters. As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, Darius exhaled deeply. The encounter had been draining, but it had also been necessary. For far too long, moments like this had gone unchecked, hidden behind the veil of policies and procedures. But today, he had peeled back that veil for everyone to see. Walking down the street, Darius thought back to the teller's young face, her nervous hands clutching the business card he'd given her. If even one person in that room walked away from today with a new perspective, it would have been worth it. The lesson was clear. We must challenge our biases, treat others with dignity, and hold ourselves accountable for the ways we interact with the world. Every action, no matter how small, has the power to create a ripple of change. As Darius disappeared into the bustling city, the faint sound of justice lingered in the air, leaving behind a story that no one in that bank would soon forget. Stories like these remind us of the importance of challenging prejudice and advocating for fairness. If this resonated with you, share this story, subscribe to our channel, and join us in spreading awareness about the power of respect, equality, and understanding.